What's up, everybody? Today I'm going to be ranking the Evil Dead movies. I just saw Evil Dead Rise Friday night, and I'm excited to finally do a ranking of this franchise. And just to preface this, I'll say that I'm not the biggest Evil Dead fan in the world. I do really like this franchise. The Evil Dead movies are classics, but it's not. None of them are really like my favorite horror movies of all time or anything like that. I think I'm more of a casual Evil Dead fan. And then, as typical with this ranking, this is just my opinion. I'm not trying to rank the movies based on how good I think they are or how popular they are. This is just my personal opinion of what I think of them, of course. And one thing I do like about this franchise as a whole is it's very consistent, and I feel like every movie is solid to some degree or another. Obviously, some movies I think are better than others, but I would not say that there's a single bad movie in this franchise. And you can't say that about too many horror movie franchises. Most of them have a couple of good movies and then like a lot of really shitty sequels or remakes. I feel like every movie in this franchise has some merit to it. So, yeah, let's just get started. This is my ranking of the Evil Dead movies, and my ranking might be a little bit controversial. Especially with my bottom picks. But like I said, this is just my opinion. So here we go. And I don't think any of these movies are bad, but my least favorite coming in at number 5 is the very first Evil Dead from 1981. And the reason this one is at the bottom to me is this one just feels like it has the least amount of like character to it and like personality. This movie just feels a little bit more bland than the others. Obviously, this is kind of where it all began, and this is what kickstarted the franchise. So you have to give it a lot of credit for that reason. But it just feels a little bit more bland than the other movies. Obviously, it's the lowest budget. They were just starting out. The directors and probably didn't know exactly what they wanted yet, or weren't able to achieve exactly what they were trying to do. And this first movie definitely leans more into the horror side of things, whereas a couple of the later entries, 2 and 3, lean more into the comedy. And I see a lot of people really liking this movie for claiming it to be successful at like the horror side of things, and it's one of the scariest entries in the franchise. But to me, it's never really worked as like a straight horror film. Part of that I think is just because it's so over the top and ridiculous. In like the portrayals of like the possession, and then of course like the violence and stuff. To me, it's just never really scared me. I will admit some of the possession scenes in here do make me a little bit uneasy, so it does have that little bit of like discomfort factor to it, but it's never really scared me. I think the main reason a lot of people like this one is because of nostalgia. They probably watched it when they were younger. It terrified the hell out of them. I mean, when this first came out, this was pretty game-changing to horror movies, don't get me wrong. But I think out of the entire franchise, I feel like this one hasn't aged as well as the others. And yeah, again, I don't hate this. It's not a bad movie. This one is probably like a 3 out of 5 stars for me. Obviously, this is a classic. It's what started the series. But it's just my personal least favorite. I don't get as much enjoyment out of this one as I do the others. But it's not bad. It just doesn't really work as a straight horror film for me, like I said. And it doesn't have enough of that humor in it in the later films to make it entertaining, and it doesn't really have a lot of rewatchability or rewatch. Like, I'm not going to rewatch this one as much as the others, is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, this one comes in at number 5 for me. And I know this might tick off some people, because I know a lot of people have this one really high up on their list, or even their top favorites. So yeah, this one is my least favorite though. Okay. Coming in at number 4, and this list is subject to change. Having just seen this movie, I'm going to have to rewatch a couple times, but coming in at number 4 is Evil Dead Rise, and I don't have a copy of it yet with it being a new release, but I'll pop a picture of the poster somewhere up here on the screen. And Evil Dead Rise, this is one that I have a lot of mixed feelings about upon first viewing. Like I said, I just watched this Friday night. I've thought about it a lot. I've watched other people's reviews of this. And some of these movies in this series, my opinions have changed on them a little bit over time the more I've watched them. Some of them have grown on me more. Others I've liked less, like the first one. So after watching this list might change a little bit, or watching this movie a couple more times. But Evil Dead Rise, it has some really great things about it, but there's also some things that I'm really disappointed with about it. And I feel like I'm kind of in the middle on it. I see a lot of positivity for this movie. Some people are loving this and saying it's one of the best of the franchise. And then I've also seen a handful of people that say they hate it and it's the worst. I think I kind of fall somewhere in between. Um, Starting off with the positives, the things I like about this movie, I feel like the most noteworthy thing, in my opinion, with Evil Dead Rise is the lead actresses, Alyssa Sutherland and I forget the other girl's name that plays the aunt, but they're both incredible actresses. They, especially Alyssa Sutherland when she is possessed. Ellie is my absolute favorite Deadite of this entire franchise, which is a bold statement for being the fifth movie in this franchise at this point. But her performance and the makeup effects and the way she looks, it is phenomenal. I absolutely love it. Ellie is hands down my favorite Deadite. Super creepy. The acting is just outstanding, like I've already said. It's just, yeah, that's one of my favorite things about this movie. I like that they tried something different too. I like the skyrise apartment setting. We get like a more unique flavor with this different setting. It's got a different atmosphere than the other movies, and it's also got this really like personal, more emotional weight to it with this family dynamic rather than just having a bunch of random teenagers at a cabin in the woods. Um, this one has kind of higher stakes with this tight knit family, and I will admit the characters weren't exactly the most well developed or well believable or drawn characters. They were a bit like shallow, but just the fact that you have this family dynamic, you have these three very young kids that are very much like threatened and like victimized by these evil spirits, by the Deadites. There's just something about that that's a little bit more intense and frightening than what we've seen in the other Evil Dead movies. So I like that they tried something different with this. I don't think it was executed as well as it could have been. It felt like they were locked up in the apartment for too much of the movie. I really don't think they capitalized on the idea of having like this big skyrise apartment. They're just locked up in this one room, like tiny apartment basically for most of the movie. And while I will admit that kind of helps give the movie a feeling of like claustrophobia, it doesn't really feel all that different from like the cabin in the wood type setting. Like they really could have made better use of this giant building, I think. And there's also just something about this movie. I haven't been able to quite put my finger on it. It just feels kind of like there's something missing to it. It just feels a bit lacking in some areas. I think part of the reason is I went into Evil Dead Rise with too high of expectations. um, some of the other movies in this franchise just have set the bar so high, and I've come to love them so much that I went into this just expecting it to be epic, and it didn't quite deliver for me. Um, let's see. One thing too that I didn't quite deliver for me is like the violence and the gore. It was very violent and gory. Don't get me wrong; it's an Evil Dead film through and through, but it just didn't feel like it went all the way with it. It felt like it was holding back just a little bit. I was expecting it to be a little bit more carnage fueled than it was. And then there were a few scenes too that I think were there for like that little bit of comedic relief that's we see throughout this franchise, but it just didn't really work for me. We get a couple like callback scenes to Evil Dead 2 where there's like an eyeball, um, and then there's like some chanting of the Dead by Dawn thing, and it just I don't know, it just didn't work for me. It just was too obvious of like a throwback to those classic Evil Dead movies. They were just too, it was just too on the nose, too obvious for me. It didn't do anything. It's like, we get it, it's an Evil Dead film, you're trying to pay homage to the previous films in the franchise, but it was just, I don't know, that it didn't really do anything for me. I would have preferred for this to either have played it straight all the way, with this being more serious and more darker of a movie, kind of like the 2013 entry, or if they are going to have some humor in it, go a little bit further, have some more comedic relief than just these little tiny moments sprinkled throughout. So yeah, it just had that kind of weird balance for me that I didn't really like all that much. Um, Man, I should have done an individual review for Evil Dead Rise because I have a lot of thoughts on it. But overall, it's a light good for me. I enjoyed it. but it was also disappointing in some regards. I kind of see both sides of the coin of where people are coming from this, and all of the other reviews I've seen for Evil Dead Rise. I can understand the people that are really disappointed with this film, and I also understand the people that love this and say it's just as good as the rest of them. So, yeah, overall, Evil Dead Rise for me is like a 3.5 out of 5. It's a good movie. It tries some different things. It almost isn't different enough, though. I wished it would have just gone further, taken more advantage of this new setting that we got, had some better developed characters to it. But overall, it was still a good movie. I give it a 3.5 out of 5, but as of right now, it comes in at number 4 on my ranking. Okay, coming in at number 3 on my ranking is Evil Dead 2013. Now, I see a lot of people calling this a remake. I don't think this is technically a remake. I've just always been under the impression that this just takes place in a different timeline, with different characters, but it, of course takes place within like the same world, the same cabin in the woods setting. I don't think that. I mean, I guess you can call it a remake just for the sake of argument, or for going into this long explanation about what this is, a remake, requel, prequel, whatever. But yeah. Anyway, Evil Dead 2013. I mentioned earlier about some of the movies in this franchise. Some of them have grown on me a little bit more over time, and this is one of them. So maybe after watching Rise a couple more times, maybe that one will grow on me more and I'll end up liking it more than this. Who knows? But when I first saw this, I didn't see this in theaters, but I think I first saw it like after it just left theaters and it was like on demand or something. But I remember when I first watched this, I was a little bit disappointed with it. I didn't love it at all. And I couldn't tell you exactly why. I just remember not really being impressed by it for whatever reason. And then after watching it again a few years ago, and then just rewatching it recently leading up to Rise, this has grown on me a lot. I really like this movie. This one is probably close to a 4 out of 5 stars. I feel like just shy, kind of like a 3.75 out of 5. Kind of like Rise. This one I do also have some mixed thoughts on. There's some things I don't like about it, but I feel like it's a more solid and satisfying film overall, which is why I decided to put it above Rise. Starting off with my positives for this movie, and this is a really big positive. I absolutely love the story and the setup to this. It is simple, but it just works so well. So it's basically about this girl who's addicted to drugs, and her friends take her up to this cabin, which of course happens to be the cabin in the woods with the Necronomicon and all of that. And they're trying to help her out by taking her up to this cabin as sort of like a mini vacation, but the primary reason being to keep her there so she can basically beat this drug addiction. She has to leave her drugs behind. They're keeping her at this cabin so she won't have access to, any of the drugs out in the public world or whatever. And it gives the characters a good reason for going up to this cabin and for staying there once her withdrawal symptoms kick in and she starts seeing things and kind of going crazy. It's a very believable, very convincing setup, and it just works so well. And it also does create this sense of sympathy for the characters, I think. It creates some good characterization. You feel for them a little bit. Adds a little bit of an emotional weight to it, kind of like Rise, in a different way, but sort of similar to Rise. This one actually attempts decent characters and kind of that emotional connection, which you can't really say that about any of the first 3 Evil Dead films, in my opinion. So yeah, great setup, great story. And of course, this one is just super carnage fueled. This is the bloodiest and the most violent of the franchise. Lots of just super detailed scenes of gore and blood and dismemberment and just craziness. So that's a plus as well. And then the final act of this movie too is just epic. It is metal as hell. And I love it. The final act, kind of minor spoilers, I guess. I'm sure you probably, if you're watching this, you've seen all the movies. But if not, just minor spoilers, I guess. At the end, the third act of the film, it's raining blood. And Mia is sort of fighting the Deadite, which is kind of like a clone of herself. It's like the evil side of herself, which is another thing. I'm kind of going off on a tangent here, but that's another thing I really like about this movie is the sort of symbolism it has in it. It's really about Mia sort of combating her own carnal nature and this drug addiction. And the Deadite in this movie, the main Deadite, is sort of like this evil side of Mia. It looks just like her. It's like this girl, like demon creature, and she has to fight it without that. Well, the friends helped her out earlier in the movie, but at the end, it's basically just her fighting this creature herself and having to, like, just, I don't know, like, risk everything. It's awesome. I don't even know how to explain it. But yeah, the third act of this movie is epic. It's raining blood. It's just her and this Deadite just duking it out, and it's badass. I love it. So yeah, those are the things I really love about this movie. Where it falls short for me a little bit, and this is, I think, what kept me from liking it when I first watched it, is the entire middle act just feels a little bit shaky. It's kind of, there's some plot convenience with like certain characters being absent. It feels sort of directionless. Basically, there's just a lot of these violent scenes happening with the various people getting possessed and then attacking one another. And it just so happens, so works out that a lot of these characters will be just like by themselves in the cabin or in a certain situation to where they become an easy victim for to be attacked by one of the Deadites. And then several minutes later, the other surviving characters will come running in to help. And it's just a lot of that. And there's just something about it that just feels a little bit like sloppy to me. I don't know if this is something that's like just a personal problem that I have with it, or if it's something that other people have noticed. And then there's also some of the stuff in here is just a little bit too much for me, in the sense that it feels kind of corny. There's just a few scenes where it just gets so ridiculously violent that it just borders into the comedy, and maybe that was intentional. I don't know. Some of it is really effective, though. Don't get me wrong. There's a scene where there's like a needle going into the guy's eye, and he has to pull it out, and that just makes me cringe like super hard. Like that is that is really just cringeworthy. And then there's also a scene where Mia, when she's possessed, like, or one of the girls when she's possessed, like brings down the crowbar and like splits the guy's hand in half. It is just super freaking brutal. But some of the things too that I do find a little bit corny with this is the dialogue when Mia is possessed. There's some lines that she throws out that I don't know if this was supposed to be intentionally funny or not, but it just came off corny as hell to me, and it kind of killed the vibe, killed the mood of like the intensity and the dark tone that this movie is going for. Because similar to Rise, this one is very, very dark and much, much more serious than the first three films of the Evil Dead franchise. So yeah, there's just a few things here and there that sort of offset that dark tone and vibe to it. And of course, there's always humor, a little bit of humor in these movies. So it is staying faithful to the franchise in that regards, with having a little bit of that comedic relief. But I just don't like the balance that it has. I would have preferred, with this movie being more serious and darker, to have just played it straight all the way, kind of like Rise. Or if they are going to have a little bit more humor in it, have a little bit more, make it more obvious that that's what they're doing. That's just my personal opinion. But yeah, overall, the 2013 version of Evil Dead, because I don't like calling it a remake, this is a really solid movie. Again, it's not perfect for me. It's like a low 4 out of 5 stars, like 3.75. And it has grown on me a lot more over time. But yeah, it comes in at number 3 on my ranking. Okay, coming in at number 2, and I will say before I reveal what it is, that these top 2 spots are basically tied for me. I have a really hard time deciding which one I like more. And this is also one that's grown on me a lot the more that I've watched it. I think the first time I saw this, I wasn't really all that impressed. And coming in at number 2 is Evil Dead 2: Dead by Dawn. Now, when I first watched this, I saw this many, many years ago when I was, I don't know, late teens, early 20s. And at the time, I mean, I was a big horror fan at the time, but I hadn't watched a lot of like these more campy horror movies, especially from like the 80s and the 90s, where they're just like comedy horror, they're just goofy. And so I don't think I really understood this when I first watched it. But after rewatching it again recently, this one has grown on me a lot. And this one, I feel like I'm going to probably rewatch the most out of any movie in this franchise. It just really clicked with me this time around. This movie is definitely the strangest and the most unique of the franchise, I feel. It is just super goofy, wacky. It's just a really hard to describe movie. But there's just something about this one that it just has so much personality to it for that reason. Um, this one definitely leans a little bit more into the comedic side of things, but I just love it for how bizarre it is. There's like some weird, like Tim Burton style, like puppet stuff going on in this movie. There's a scene where Bruce Campbell or Ash gets his hand cut, or he cuts his hand off because it's possessed, and his hand like is running around, and he's trying to shoot it with a shotgun, and then the hand turns around and gives him the finger, and it's hilarious. I absolutely love Evil Dead 2. I really don't have many complaints with this movie. I just don't quite love it. For me, this is like a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Again, none of the movies in this franchise reach like my top all-time favorite horror films. These top 2 spots come close. I think maybe if I was doing like a top 20 horror movie list, these top 2 would make it on there. But yeah, Evil Dead 2 is just fantastic. Honestly, it's got kind of a weird balance of comedy and horror. Like I said, when I first watched this, I just didn't really get it, and I don't think it clicked with me. But it's grown on me a lot over time, and this one is also, of course, very violent, very gory. There's an awesome final battle between Ash Williams and the Mother Deadite, like this old lady that sort of morphs into this creature, and it is just epic. And this movie also kind of went on to inspire Dead Alive, which is one of my all-time favorite horror movies. I know some people will probably slander me down in the comments for this, but I think Dead Alive is actually better than pretty much every Evil Dead film. I like that film more for some reason, but this is a cult classic. This is a definition of a cult classic in horror comedy, and I don't really know what to say about this one, honestly. This is just great. If you haven't seen Evil Dead 2 yet, I highly recommend this. I absolutely adore this movie. Okay, and then coming in at number 1, and again, this one is kind of tied with my last spot. They might flip spots in the future, I don't know. But this one I've seen the most times out of all of them. As of now, I think I've seen it 4 or 5 times, and that is Army of Darkness. And this one leans full on into the comedy. This one isn't really that scary. Really, the only complaint I have with this movie is it's lacking a little bit in the horror and the violence of the previous films in the franchise. With this one leaning full on into the comedy, and then I also think that this movie used most of its budget in the setting, in like props, and like just set design and that kind of thing, as it takes place in like medieval times. There's just a lot of equipment and just the whole like setting and the design of the film. I'm pretty sure a lot of the budget went to that, so they probably they weren't able to focus as much on like the gore and the violence in this. That's really my only complaint with this, is it could have been a little bit scarier, and I would have liked to see some more blood and gore in this. But apart from that, this movie is absolutely epic. I like this one because over the first 2 Evil Dead films, this one has the most story to it. The first 2 don't really have any story going on. You have the characters at a cabin in the woods, the demons get released, and carnage ensues. That's it. In this movie, Ash gets sent back in time. He has to find, which I'll admit it's not a super elaborate story, but he has to find the Necronomicon to be able to return to his own time. And then he agrees to help defeat the army of the undead, and help the knights in like this medieval setting. So I like this one because it has more of a story to it. And Ash is the most developed character in this movie as well, or he's at his most developed and well realized in this movie is what I'm trying to say. His character wasn't really all that great in the previous 2 films. In this film, he's got the best one-liners. He's much funnier, much more charming. I feel like Ash Williams as a character rose to fame with this Army of Darkness. This movie is just super quotable. Kind of like Evil Dead 2. This is just a cult classic. And it's hilarious. This is definitely the funniest movie of the bunch. And of course, you're not going to see the movies just for the comedy. But this one, Army of Darkness, is just a hilarious movie. I absolutely love it. It's kind of tied with Evil Dead 2. I'd probably give this one a 4.5 out of 5 stars as well. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. This is probably my favorite Evil Dead movie. Again, I've seen it the most times, and I don't really have any complaints with it other than it just feels a little bit lacking in that it doesn't have like the blood and gore to it that the previous movies do. But Yeah, I absolutely love Army of Darkness. One of my favorites. And it comes in at number 1 for my ranking. All right, guys, that is my ranking of the Evil Dead franchise. Um, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say, what your favorite movies are, what your least favorite movies are in this franchise. Again, after I watch some of these, some more, especially Rise, my list might change a little bit. I'm curious to watch Rise a second time and see what I think of it. But as of now, this is my ranking for the Evil Dead franchise. I hope they keep doing more movies because there's not a bad movie in this franchise, and I don't believe that there will be a bad movie in this franchise, especially if the original producers stay kind of like at the helm and sort of advising like the process or overseeing it. Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell. I have complete faith that they're going to keep this franchise alive and still going strong all these years later. So yeah, I love the Evil Dead movies. That's my ranking. Let me know down in the comments what you think of these films if you've seen them. And that's all I have for today, guys. See you later.